In spring 2024, my slice of paradise was a modest 5 acres tucked against a winding creek in Willow Bend, a rural subdivision where the HOA's grip felt more like a suggestion than a stranglehold, or so I thought. The creek, shimmering under April's golden light, was my haven. I'd spend mornings there with Pixel, my scruffy mutt, watching him chase dragonflies while I sipped coffee, the water's murmur drowning out the world. The easement granting me access to that creek was etched in my deed, a legal lifeline I never expected to defend. Enter Karen Davis, my neighbor and the HOA's self-appointed enforcer. Karen lived in a McMansion 2 lots over, her lawn manicured to sterile perfection, her mailbox emblazoned with Davis in gold script. She had a knack for turning molehills into mountains. Last year, she'd find a retiree for planting unauthorized roses. I'd kept my distance, nodding politely at HOA meetings while she droned about community standards. But when I spotted her directing a work crew to plant a chain-link fence along our shared boundary, slicing off my creek access, I knew avoidance wasn't an option. The fence posts were half buried when I approached, Pixel trotting at my heels. The creek sparkled behind the workers, taunting me. "Karen," I said, keeping my voice even, "this easement's on my title. You can't block it." I held up a survey map, its lines crisp, and a copy of my deed highlighted where the easement was spelled out. Karen, in a pastel tracksuit, barely glanced at them. Her platinum hair caught the sun as she smirked. "This is HOA land, sweetheart. I'm securing it. You'll thank me when vagrants aren't fishing in our creek." I swallowed a retort. The creek wasn't hers to claim, it was a shared resource, legally mine to access. "The survey says otherwise," I replied, handing her a photocopy. "Check the county records." Her eyes narrowed, but she took the papers, her manicured nails tapping. "We'll see about that," she snapped, then spun on her heels, barking at the crew to pause. Pixel whined, sensing my tension. I patted his head, my stomach twisting. I'd moved here for peace, not battles, but Karen's entitlement was a storm cloud I couldn't ignore. That afternoon, I double-checked my documents. The survey, done when I bought the place in 2022, was airtight. The easement, a 20-foot strip along the creek, was non-negotiable. I called Nora Beltran, the surveyor, who confirmed the county had my back. Still, Karen's smugness gnawed at me. She wasn't the type to admit defeat. As Pixel napped on the porch, I stared at the creek, its ripples catching the sunset. This land was more than property. It was where I'd rebuilt after a rough divorce, where I'd started keeping bees, where Pixel's joyful barks echoed. I wouldn't let Karen steal that. By evening, a sheriff's cruiser rolled up. Deputy Rogers, a lanky man with a no-nonsense drawl, stepped out. Karen trailed him, arms crossed, her face a mix of triumph and indignation. "This is the trespasser," she declared, pointing at me. I raised an eyebrow but stayed calm, handing Rogers my documents. "The easement's legal, sir. Here's the proof." Rogers skimmed the papers, his brow furrowing as Karen ranted about HOA jurisdiction and property values. He held up a hand, silencing her. "Ma'am, this deed's clear. The easement's his. You can't fence it." He turned to me. "You're good, sir. Call if she tries again." To Karen, he added, "Have a pleasant day." His tone was polite but final. Karen's face reddened, her lips a thin line. She stormed off, muttering about lawyers. Rogers tipped his hat and drove away. I exhaled, scratching Pixel's ears as he nudged my leg. The creek glimmered, still mine for now. But Karen's glare as she'd left was a promise of trouble. I watched the stars emerge, a chill settling in. I'd won this round, but something told me Karen was just getting started. My bees hummed in their hives, a reminder of what I was fighting for. Whatever came next, I'd be ready. It was late May 2024, 2 weeks after Karen Davis's failed attempt to fence off my creek easement. I'd hoped the sheriff's visit would end her crusade, but as I pulled into my driveway one humid evening, my heart sank. My wire fence along the creek was slashed in 3 places, jagged cuts glinting in the dusk. Deep tire tracks scarred the mud near the water, and one of my beehives, home to my beloved honeybees, lay in ruins, wooden frames splintered, honey oozing into the grass like spilled gold. The air buzzed with disoriented bees, their hum a mournful plea. Worst of all, Pixel, my loyal mutt, limped toward me, whimpering. A nail board, crudely rigged with rusted spikes, was tangled in the weeds by the fence line. One nail had pierced his paw, blood matting his fur. I knelt, heart pounding, and gently freed him, my hands shaking with rage and guilt. At the vet, Dr. Ellis cleaned the wound, prescribed antibiotics, and warned of infection. "Keep him off that paw," she said. The $200 bill was nothing compared to the ache of seeing Pixel curl up, subdued, on his bed. This wasn't just property damage, it was personal. I was done playing defense. That night I ordered 4 motion sensor cameras, each with night vision and real-time alerts. By noon the next day they were mounted, 2 on the barn, 2 along the creek, silently watching. I also called Nora Beltran, the surveyor who'd mapped my property in 2022. Nora, a wiry woman with a voice like gravel, didn't mince words. "I'll stake your lines so clear even an HOA busybody can't miss M." By evening, fluorescent orange stakes dotted my boundary, each paired with a laminated placard citing state law. Tampering with survey markers is a Class A misdemeanor. I barely slept, my phone propped on the nightstand, waiting for the cameras to ping. At 1:13 a.m. they did. The app's live stream showed 2 figures in hoodies creeping along the creek. One tall and lanky wielded bolt cutters, snapping my fence wire. The other, shorter, with platinum blonde hair spilling from her hood, yanked Nora's stakes and hurled them into the water. Moonlight caught her face, Karen, her sneer unmistakable. The man's face flashed briefly, too, as he tripped over a root. I saved the footage, my pulse racing. This was the evidence I needed. I called Deputy Rogers at dawn. He arrived within the hour, his cruiser kicking up dust. I showed him the video on my tablet, Pixel resting at my feet, his paw bandaged. Rogers squinted at the screen, then nodded. "That's Chandler Hayes, local troublemaker, been in my logbook before, petty theft, bar fights." He paused, studying Karen's image, and Mrs. Davis, not surprised. He radioed for a warrant, citing criminal mischief and trespassing. By 7 a.m., Rogers and 2 deputies knocked on Chandler's door, a rundown trailer 5 miles away. Body cam footage, which I later saw, caught Chandler in sagging pajama pants, bleary-eyed, insisting he'd been sleeping all night. Rogers held up a still from my camera. Chandler mid-GR. Chandler froze, his bravado crumbling. At Karen's McMansion, deputies found the stolen stakes in her garage, along with a can of spray paint matching the graffiti on my no trespassing signs. Karen claimed Chandler stored tools there without her knowledge, but the footage told a different story. Both were cuffed and hauled to county jail. Karen, ever the HOA queen, made bond by lunch, her lawyer already spinning excuses. Chandler, on probation for a 2021 check fraud, wasn't so lucky. A no-bond hold kept him locked up. As the patrol cars left, I stood by the creek, Pixel's tail thumping softly. The bees were rebuilding, their hum a faint promise of recovery. Karen thought she could bully me into submission, but she'd handed me her downfall on a digital platter. This fight was far from over, but I had the upper hand. By June 2024, the creek beside my property flowed peacefully again, but the battle with Karen Davis was far from over. Her arrest with Chandler Hayes for trespassing and vandalism had been a victory, but I sensed their scheme ran deeper than a few stolen survey stakes. Pixel, his paw healing, dozed on the porch as I met with Elliot, my lawyer, in my kitchen. His briefcase overflowed with HOA records, and his grin hinted at a bombshell. "We've got them," he said, sliding a cashier's check across the table. It was for $3,500, signed by Chandler, drawn from the HOA's reserve account to fund Karen's illegal gate. I leaned back, the scent of coffee grounding me. "How they pull that off," Elliot explained. Chandler, the HOA's bookkeeper, had access to the accounts. We'd subpoenaed the records to trace the gate's funding, expecting a small paper trail. Instead, we uncovered a financial house of cards. Chandler had written checks totaling $46,900 over 2 years for grounds improvements that never happened, phantom landscaping, non-existent repairs. The gate was just the latest scam. Worse, $12,000 had been funneled to Karen's personal account, labeled as consulting fees for services she never provided. My bees buzzed outside, their hum a stark contrast to the greed unfolding on paper. Elliot's findings lit a fire under the HOA board. At an emergency meeting, neighbors I'd barely spoken to, retirees, young families, sat stunned as Elliot presented the evidence. Mrs. Larson, a board member with a penchant for knitting, gasped, "That's our playground fund." The board voted unanimously to press charges against Chandler, and Corinne's name hung heavy in the air. I left the meeting, Pixel trotting beside me, feeling a mix of vindication and unease. Corinne's McMansion loomed as I passed, its shutters drawn. She wasn't done fighting. The county's white-collar crime unit took over, led by Detective Miriam Page, a sharp-eyed investigator with a reputation for dismantling fraud. Page visited my property the next day, her boots crunching on the gravel. "This is bigger than trespassing," she said, eyeing the creek where Corinne's stakes had been tossed. "Chandler's sloppy, but Corinne's the brains." She seized Chandler's home computer and a box of HOA files from his trailer. What she found was a goldmine: forged receipts for fake projects, doctored meeting minutes, and a Word template for neon green approved stamps used on fraudulent invoices. One email from Corinne to Chandler read, "Handle the paperwork and we'll split the creek lot." My land was their endgame. I sat with Paige at my dining table, the camera footage from that moonlit night still vivid in my mind. "How'd they think they'd get away with this?" I asked. Paige shrugged. "Greed blinds people. Chandler's in over his head, but Corinne's banking on her lawyer." That lawyer was James Hall, a $600 an hour defense attorney Corinne hired the day after her arrest. Hall, all slick suits and stonewalling, refused to let Corinne answer Paige's questions. Her silence screamed guilt, but her checkbook spoke louder. I scratched Pixel's ears, my jaw tight. Corinne's money might delay justice, but it wouldn't stop it. Chandler, meanwhile, was cracking, facing new felony charges: embezzlement, forgery, and conspiracy, plus a probation revocation from his 2021 check fraud. He was desperate. Page offered a deal: testify against Corinne for a reduced sentence. By late June, Chandler took it. Elliot called me as I tended my beehives, the sun warm on my shoulders. "Chandler spilling everything," he said. "Corinne orchestrated the land grab, used the HOA funds as her piggy bank. He's got dates, emails, the works." I set down my bee smoker, relief washing over me. The creek glinted through the trees, a reminder of what I'd fought for: peace, not just property. But I wasn't naive. Corinne's lawyer would spin this, maybe pin it all on Chandler. As I walked the easement with Pixel, his tail wagging, I felt a cautious hope. The bees were rebuilding, their hives stronger than before. I was too. Corinne had underestimated me, thinking her HOA clout and Chandler's dirty work would scare me off. Instead, their greed had laid a trail straight to their downfall. Page's investigation was closing in, and Chandler's testimony was the key. I looked at my land, 5 acres of hardwood sanctuary, and knew I'd see this through no matter how long it took. In October 2024, the county courtroom buzzed with anticipation, its wooden benches packed with HOA neighbors, reporters, and curious locals. The air smelled of polished oak and tension as I sat in the front row, Pixel's absence a quiet ache. He was home, his paw healed, but I wished he could sense this moment. Corinne Davis and Chandler Hayes faced trial for their crimes against my land and the HOA's trust. After months of legal wrangling, Detective Page's evidence, and Chandler's plea deal, the truth was about to unfold. The prosecutor, a wiry woman named Lena Cruz, called Chandler to the stand. He shuffled forward, his orange jumpsuit a far cry from the hoodie he'd worn that moonlit night. Under oath, he detailed Corinne's scheme with a nervous clarity. "She wanted the creek lot," he said, voice low. "Promised me a cut if I handled the dirty work: fence cutting, stakes, the gate money." He admitted siphoning $46,900 from the HOA, funneling $12,000 to Corinne as consulting fees. The jury leaned in, some jotting notes, as Chandler described Corinne's emails directing him to forge receipts and dodge audits. I gripped my seat, the memory of my shattered beehive flashing, honey in the dirt, bees lost. Cruz played my Ring camera footage on a courtroom screen. The grainy video was damning. 12:47 a.m., Corinne's platinum hair glinting as she loaded rebar into her SUV, Chandler beside her yanking survey stakes. The timestamp matched the night my property was violated. A juror gasped, another shook her head. Corinne, seated at the defense table, stared straight ahead, her $600 an hour lawyer, James Hall, whispering furiously. Hall cross-examined Chandler, painting him as a lone crook, but Chandler's emails, pulled from his seized computer, showed Karen's orders in black and white. The jury wasn't buying Hall's spin. Karen took the stand, her voice icy. "I trusted Chandler with the HOA books," she claimed, adjusting her silk scarf. "I had no idea about the funds or his nighttime antics." Cruz dismantled her, presenting the spray paint can from Karen's garage matched to my deface signs and the stolen stakes found beside her lawnmower. Karen's composure cracked, her lips pursing as Cruz asked, "Why were you at the creek at midnight, Mrs. Davis?" Silence. I exhaled, the weight of months lifting slightly. "My land, my bees, Pixel's pain, they'd be avenged." After 3 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 4 hours. The foreman, a retired teacher, read the verdict: guilty on all counts, felony conspiracy, theft, criminal mischief, and misdemeanor trespassing. The courtroom hummed, whispers rippling. Karen's shoulders slumped, her scarf slipping. Chandler stared at the floor, resigned. I caught Deputy Rogers' eye across the room. He gave a subtle nod, his hat in hand. At sentencing a week later, the judge didn't hold back. Karen got 18 months in state prison, her bond revoked. She was ordered to pay $32,000 in restitution to me for damages, fence, beehive, pixels, vet bills, and $46,900 to the HOA for the stolen funds. A 5-year no-contact order barred her from me, my land, or the creek. Chandler, with his plea deal, faced 4 years, eligible for parole in 2, plus his 18-month probation violation for the 2021 fraud. The gavel fell, sharp and final. As Karen was led away, cuffs glinting, I met her eyes. Her glare was defiant but hollow. I gave a polite wave, not out of spite but closure. She tried to steal my peace, my sanctuary, and failed. Outside, the autumn air was crisp, the creek waiting beyond the courthouse. I thought of Pixel chasing dragonflies and my bees rebuilding their hives. The land was mine again, not just in law but in spirit. Driving home, I passed the HOA's entrance sign, no longer a symbol of Karen's reign. Elliot called, his voice light. "We did it, restitution's coming and the HOA's cleaning house." I smiled, picturing my greenhouse plans where Karen's gate once stood. Justice wasn't just the sentence, it was the chance to rebuild, to let the creek flow free. This chapter was closed and I was ready for the next. In January 2025, the creek beside my 5 acres sparkled under a pale winter sun, its ripples a quiet promise of peace restored. The legal storm with Karen Davis and Chandler Hayes had passed, their convictions a hard-won victory. Pixel, my scruffy mutt, bounded through the frosted grass, his paw fully healed from that awful nailboard. As I sipped coffee on the porch, the hum of my beehives, rebuilt after Karen's vandalism, filled the air. The land felt like mine again, not just in deed, but in soul. Yet the scars of the fight lingered, and I knew healing meant more than a courtroom win. The Willow Bend HOA, once Karen's personal fiefdom, was transforming. A new board, elected in a flurry of post-scandal meetings, mailed me a letter that felt like a fresh breeze. Signed by Mrs. Larson, the knit-loving retiree who'd gasped at Chandler's fraud. It was a formal apology for the HOA's lapse in oversight. Tucked inside was a check for $4,500 drawn from Chandler's frozen bank account to cover my destroyed beehive, fence repairs, and Pixel's vet bills. "We're committed to transparency," the letter read, promising open books and community input. I tucked the check in my drawer, not for the money, but for what it symbolized: accountability. The apology stirred something in me. Karen's gate, that ugly symbol of her land grab, still stood where she'd tried to annex my creek access. It had to go. I hired a local contractor, a gruff man named Tom who'd clashed with Karen over her unauthorized mailbox font. By mid-January, the gate was gone, its metal scrapped for cash I donated to a dog shelter in Pixel's name. In its place, I planned a greenhouse, nothing grand, just a 12 by 20-foot frame for tomatoes, herbs, and maybe sunflowers. Tom and I broke ground on a crisp morning, the soil rich and dark. Pixel nosed the dirt, tail wagging as I drove the first stake. This wasn't just a building, it was a reclaiming. The greenhouse took shape over weeks, its glass panels catching the February light. I planted seedlings, Roma tomatoes, basil, marigolds for the bees, each one a small act of defiance against Karen's chaos. The bees, my resilient little warriors, were thriving, their hives producing honey again. I'd lost a colony to the vandalism, a grief I hadn't expected to feel so deeply, but the survivors gave me hope. One evening, as I checked the hives, a neighbor, Mr. Patel, stopped by. He'd been at the HOA meeting, quiet but furious about the stolen playground funds. "You fought for us all," he said, handing me a jar of his wife's mango chutney. I smiled, touched. The creek, the bees, Pixel's joyful barks, this was worth every battle. Then came the news that sealed the transformation. Corinne's McMansion foreclosed after her sentencing, sold in late February to Sprout Tomorrow, an organic farming nonprofit. I learned about it from Mrs. Larson, who knocked on my door with a flyer. "They're turning her lawn into a community garden," she said, eyes bright. "Native pollinators, raised beds, even a kid's plot." The irony was delicious. Corinne, who'd weaponized HOA rules to control us, would see her land become a shared sanctuary. Sprout Tomorrow's mission was to grow food for local pantries, and they'd already reached out to me, knowing my bees could pollinate their crops. I agreed to consult, picturing lavender and clover blooming where Corinne's sterile grass once reigned. As March arrived, I walked the easement with Pixel, the greenhouse glowing behind us. The creek murmured, free of Corinne's fences, its banks dotted with early wildflowers. I thought of the fight, the nailboard, the courtroom, the sleepless nights waiting for camera pings. It had tested me, but it had also shown me what this land meant. It wasn't just 5 acres. It was where I'd rebuilt after loss, where Pixel's trust kept me grounded, where the bees taught me resilience. The HOA's check, the greenhouse, Sprout Tomorrow's garden, they were proof that destruction could lead to growth. I knelt by the creek, Pixel nudging my hand. The community was healing, and so was I. Corinne's shadow was gone, replaced by tomato vines and neighborly gestures. Sprout Tomorrow's first planting day was weeks away, and I'd be there, maybe with a tray of seedlings to share. The land, once a battleground, was becoming a bridge between me and my neighbors, between past fights and future harvests. I stood, the sun warming my face, and knew this was only the beginning. By April 2025, spring had painted my 5 acres in vibrant hues, wildflowers along the creek, tomato seedlings thriving in the greenhouse, and my bees humming with purpose. Pixel, fully recovered, chased butterflies through the grass, his joyful barks a soundtrack to my mornings. Corinne Davis's schemes felt like a distant storm, her prison sentence and the HOA's reform a testament to justice. Yet as I sipped coffee on the porch, a new challenge arrived in the mail, proving her shadow lingered. The letter was from Elaine Castor, claiming to be Corinne's cousin and heir. She asserted a private right-of-way across my easement, citing a deed supposedly granting her creek access. My stomach tightened, another land grab cloaked in legalese. I called Elliot, my lawyer, who laughed dryly. Forged, I'd bet my license. He dug into county records while I contacted Nora Beltran, the surveyor whose fluorescent stakes had foiled Corinne's first attempt. Nora's survey, cross-referenced with my 2022 title, showed no such deed. Elliot found the document in a shady online registry, its timestamps and notary seal glaringly fake. Before a court hearing could even be scheduled, Elaine withdrew her claim, her lawyer citing clerical errors. I stood by the creek, Pixel at my side, and let out a long breath. Corinne's reach was weakening, her proxies no match for truth. Restitution checks followed, small but symbolic. The state's victim fund sent $200, the first of many drawn from Corinne's prison wages, garnished at $58 a month. It'd take decades to cover the $32,000 she owed me, let alone the HOA's $46,900, but each payment was a reminder she'd lost. I deposited the check, picturing Corinne in her cell, her HOA crown long gone. The money would buy marigold seeds for the bees, a quiet jab at her defeat. Then came an unexpected letter from Chandler Hayes, postmarked from state prison. In neat handwriting, he apologized for the vandalism, the fraud, the pain. "I was greedy, followed Corinne's lead," he wrote. "I'm sorry for your dog, your bees." Enclosed was a hand-drawn map suggesting orchard placements, apple and pear trees for my land. He'd earned a paralegal certificate behind bars, a step toward redemption. I read it twice, torn. Chandler had wrecked my fence, cost my neighbors thousands, yet his words felt genuine. Sitting at my kitchen table, the greenhouse glowing outside, I wrote back. "Sunflowers are taller than ever," I said, cautious but honest. No promises, but thanks for the map. Pixel nudged my hand as if approving the small bridge I'd extended. The true healing, though, was happening on Karen's former land. Sprout Tomorrow, the nonprofit that bought her foreclosed McMansion, had raised her sterile lawn for a community garden. On their first volunteer day in late April, I arrived with my brush cutter ready to help. The air smelled of turned earth and optimism. Mrs. Larson, now HOA treasurer, hauled compost bags, her knitting needles tucked in her pocket. Mr. Patel's kids planted zucchini seeds, giggling as dirt smudged their faces. Deputy Rogers showed up off-duty, his flannel swapped for his usual uniform. "Couldn't miss this," he said, hefting a shovel. I loaned my cutter to clear weeds, and together we shaped raised beds where Karen's grass once stood. As the sun dipped, the garden took form: rows for tomatoes, trellises for beans, a pollinator patch for my bees. Laughter echoed, neighbors swapping stories of Karen's old reign. "She'd hate this," Mr. Patel chuckled, gesturing to the messy, vibrant plot. I nodded, picturing her scowl. This was justice, not in a courtroom, but in community. The creek murmured nearby, its flow uninterrupted, tying my land to this new beginning. I walked home, Pixel trotting beside me, the greenhouse a beacon in the dusk. Elaine's scam, Karen's debt, Chandler's letter, they were ripples, not waves. The land was healing, and so was I. Sprout Tomorrow's garden promised more than crops. It was a pledge to grow together. I'd fought for my acres, for Pixel, for the bees, and won something greater, a community reborn from Karen's ashes. October 2025 brought a golden crispness to Willow Bend, the creek beside my 5 acres shimmering under a harvest moon. The battles with Karen Davis, her fences, her fraud, her spite, had faded into memory, replaced by the hum of my bees, Pixel's joyful bounds through the fields, and the greenhouse glowing with tomato vines. Yet the true victory lay across the road, where Karen's former McMansion once loomed. Sprout Tomorrow, the organic farming nonprofit that bought her foreclosed property, had turned her sterile lawn into a vibrant community garden. On this night, they hosted a harvest dinner, and I stood at its heart, marveling at how far we'd come. The garden was a patchwork of life: raised beds bursting with zucchini, kale, and heirloom tomatoes, trellises heavy with snap peas, a pollinator patch buzzing with my bees' cousins. Lanterns strung between apple saplings cast a warm glow, and long tables groaned with dishes sourced from the soil we'd reclaimed. Roasted butternut squash glistened with rosemary, garlic, honey, carrots gleamed, and bruschetta piled with crimson tomatoes stole the show. Neighbors mingled, their laughter mingling with the scent of fresh earth. Mrs. Larson, the HOA's new treasurer, passed out her famous cornbread, her knitting needles tucked in a bag. Mr. Patel's kids darted between tables, clutching sunflowers they'd grown. Deputy Rogers, off-duty in a plaid shirt, swapped stories with Tom, the contractor who dismantled Karen's gate. I leaned against a trellis, Pixel at my feet, his tail thumping as he eyed a stray carrot. Sprout Tomorrow's director, a wiry woman named Clara, took a megaphone. "This garden's a miracle," she said, her voice carrying over the chatter. "And we owe a nod to our neighbor who fought for his land and inspired us all." Heads turned, eyes warm with gratitude. I shrugged, heat rising in my cheeks. "Just wanted my creek," I said, scratching Pixel's ears. The crowd chuckled, but Clara pressed on. "Your fight showed us what community can do. To you and to everyone here, thank you." She raised a glass of cider, and the crowd followed, the clink of glasses like a heartbeat. I sipped the cider, tart and sweet, and let the moment sink in. 2 years ago, Karen's fence had blocked my creek, her bolt cutters slashing my peace. The nailboard that pierced Pixel's paw, the shattered beehive, the courtroom battles, they'd tested me. But standing here, surrounded by neighbors who'd once been strangers, I saw the real victory. This wasn't just about my 5 acres. It was about turning hostility into nourishment, Karen's control into shared abundance. The garden, feeding pantries and families, was proof that destruction could bloom into something better. As dinner wound down, I wandered the garden, Pixel trotting beside me. Clara showed me the kids' plot, where Mr. Patel's daughter had scrawled "Zucchini Zone" on a sign. Mrs. Larson pointed out the pollinator patch, designed with my bees in mind. "Your hives are the real MVPs," she said, grinning. I nodded, thinking of the colony I'd lost to Karen's vandalism. The survivors had rebuilt, their honey now sweetening the carrots on tonight's table. Rogers clapped my shoulder, his shovel from the first volunteer day a distant memory. Never thought I'd be digging gardens instead of serving warrants, he said. I laughed. Suits you. The night wasn't just a celebration, it was closure. Back home, I'd been building a barn, a final act of reclaiming. Corinne's old fence, that chain-link monstrosity, had been scrapped, but I'd saved its wooden posts, weathered but sturdy. With Tom's help, I'd spent September crafting a small barn behind the greenhouse, its frame built from that reclaimed wood. The county approved the permit in a day, a far cry from Corinne's HOA reign. Inside, I stored bee equipment, tools, and a few tomato crates, but it was more than storage. Each nail driven into that wood was a stake in my victory, a permanent mark on the land I'd defended. The barn stood under the stars, its silhouette a quiet defiance. I sat on its steps now, Pixel curled beside me, the garden's lanterns twinkling across the road. The creek murmured, its flow unbroken, tying my land to the community's new roots. I thought of the fight's cost, sleepless nights, Pixel's pain, the $4,500 in damages the HOA repaid. But I also thought of its gifts. Mr. Patel's chutney, Mrs. Larson's cornbread, the kids' sunflowers. Sprout Tomorrow's garden wasn't just Corinne's defeat, it was our triumph. Her land, once a symbol of control, now fed the hungry,